Welcome to the Designated Drinker Show's Icon series. I am Louise Solis, and typically, I am your host. But in this limited series, I'm handing over the reins to historian John Taylor Chapman as he takes us on a journey through history. So sit back, grab a cocktail, and enjoy.
Yes, I'm your host, John Taylor Chapman, and indeed, I'm going to take you on a trip through time to explore African and African American cultural heritage, history, and legacy. This is no ordinary history class, not even close. Each week, I will be joined by some highly respected historians and amazing storytellers, so I promise you this, our conversations will be lively and empowering. So let's get started, shall we? In the discussions of modern-day civil rights, many of us know the very big names. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, John Lewis, and the like. But when you dig down into the local history, there are many unnamed individuals and groups that have made just as much of an impact locally in making change. Today, we're going to go back into the 1960s to tell the story of Alexandria's Secret Seven. We will hear about who the Secret Seven were and what they did from one of the people that knows the impact they made firsthand. Please welcome to the show Mrs. Lillian Patterson, a lifelong Alexandrian, educator, historian, living legend, and the wife of Edward Patterson, a member of the Secret Seven. Welcome, Mrs. Patterson.
Thank you.
So to begin with, let's talk a little bit about your history here in Alexandria. Again, you're a fourth generation, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Fourth generation, that means that that goes back to my great-great-grandmother. This grandmother that I know of was born toward the end of the Civil War. And from what I understand, she had 4 brothers, all of whom were sold. So she was never able to contact them, make contact with them again. From time to time, she would run into people that she would see, and she would say, they look like they belong to my family, but we never knew.
Okay.
And then on the other side of the fence, my father's people, the first person that came to this country back in the late 1790s was named Nace Stanton. He was bought by a family down in the Orange County area. He had 1 son whose name was Garland, but he got sold, and Garland stayed here, stayed in that area. And that son had 3 sons, and one of those 3 sons moved to Leesburg, Virginia. And that son had my father. Okay. And then my father had 7 children. And I don't know how he met my mother. My grandfather was from Leesburg, Virginia, as was my father. Maybe they met there, I don't know. But he came to Alexandria in 1926. And that was the year that he and my mother got married. They had 7 children. My mother was an only child. Her mother was an only child. And I used to hear my grandmother say, poor Esther and all those children, because there were 7 of us. And among the 7 of us, there were 20-some children. Wow. And then all the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. Dr. Durant, who came to Alexandria in the late 20s, was the doctor who delivered children here. And my understanding from my parents was that I was his first delivery.
Oh, wow.
When he came to Alexandria. That was in 1927.
Okay.
I was born on June the 22nd. That also happened to be my father's birthday. And that was also Mother and Daddy's wedding anniversary. So June 22nd was a really big day in our family. But we had a big family. We had a good time. And unlike most children, we didn't have a lot of work to do in the house. I guess with 7 children, my mother didn't know what to do with them, so she said, go out and play. And that's what we did. We played, and other kids were in the house working. But we had a good time, and dinner time was really fun because we had a huge table, and we would sit at the table for the longest kind of time at dinner. So that was a big event in our house.
Thank you for telling that family history. Let's talk a little bit more about Mr. Patterson and
My husband.
Yes, and the what he got into.
He came to Alexandria in 1940. He taught at a couple of other places before then. He came here to teach music. He was the band director. He also taught a class, a civics class that I was in. And he was a nice teacher. There were 3 teachers that I really liked. They were all men, Reverend Atkins, Mr. Howland, and Mr. Patterson.
Oh, wow. Really
Nice people. The women I had a little problem with. I don't feel like I knew him until after I got out of college. Like I said, he was the band director. And back in those days, those were days of segregation. And Parker Gray did not get the supplies and things that it needed. Band uniforms, and band instruments, they were not provided by the system. Parents worked for them and whatnot. And there was this organization that was formed called the Parker Gray Campaigners, PG Campaigners. And they formed to raise money to buy band uniforms. And one of my girlfriends was in it when I got home from college. And so she said, come on and join. I said, no, I don't want to do that. She said, oh, come on, you won't have anything else to do. So I joined, and Mr. Patterson was in the group, and we got to be friends, and I went away to work. I went to Pensacola, Florida. I was a Girl Scout professional, and I said, I'm going away and let him decide what he wants to do. And I stayed away a couple of years. We kept contact through the time, and he said he let me go away so I could decide what to do. I said, hey, we wasted 2.5 years. But I came back here to get married. Like, I got back on Sunday and the wedding was on Wednesday. Oh. So I did all the planning while I was away. And we had a very nice life because he was a very nice person. Did you ever know him? Or was he before your time?
Before my time.
He was before your time. But he was a very nice person. Yeah. People liked him. And he was a part of the Secret Seven. There were 8 people, not 7.
Okay.
And there was a man in the group somewhere nearby. He was not a part of the group. I'm not sure how he got connected. They always thought he was not a spy, but an
informant.
Yeah, and he called them the Secret Seven. You know, how are you? If he was asking people in the community, how are you going to let these 7 people tell you what to do? Right. But there were 8 people besides my husband. There was Nelson Green, Melvin Miller, Robert Terrell, James Anderson, Father John Davis. Did you ever know him?
I did not, no.
He was Episcopal.
Okay.
Marion Johnson, 2 days.
Okay.
Lawrence and Ferdinand Day.
That's right.
And each of them had expertise in some manner. My husband was the education man.
Okay.
They didn't have an official leader.
Okay.
They all had something to offer. But Melvin Miller was the official spokesman for the group. What they did was to look at issues and work them out. And they would do a position paper and pass it out through the neighborhood. They talked to all of the politicians that were running for office and questioned them, and then passed their information along to various people. And they met at no regular time.
From your vantage point, for your husband, what was the calling to get involved with this group of men?
They were all friends.
Okay.
And they saw the need to make sure that information about various issues was presented to people so they would know what was going on, how to vote, and whatnot.
And how did people within the African American community kind of take it? And I think you just mentioned this. How did people see it as this small group of men trying to organize everybody else? Was there backlash? Was there other people in the community that said, you don't speak for me?
I didn't hear that.
Okay.
I didn't hear that. And there was no formal organization of anything.
Okay.
Like I said, they would do a position paper and put it out. And they talked about all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
Housing and education, politics, just general life.
Now, and I've had the opportunity to read some of those position papers, and one of the kind of general reports that they did about the city at that time, especially for the African American community. And it's interesting to see what stuff moved forward and what stuff kind of didn't move forward as fast. In the realm of education, where your husband was working, I mean, did you see kind of some of the change that he was pushing happen in the city?
Well, one of the things they helped get Ira Robinson elected as a city councilman.
Yeah, for our listeners, Ira Robinson is going to be Alexandria's first African American city council member since Reconstruction.
In that century.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So that was extremely instrumental getting him elected for sure. Yeah.
And then after that, there was Nelson Green.
That's right. That's right. He served his term.
Yeah, they made a difference because they put information out there for people to help them make their choices.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good. No, I read particularly on some of the reports they had about city employment. One of the chapters of one of their reports was about, at that time, the lack of African Americans involved in the city as employees, whether it be general employees for the government or police officers or firefighters or things of that nature. And it's interesting to see individuals get hired kind of after that as well.
That took a long time. Because most people did menial things. There were very few people here in Alexandria that were, there were a few doctors, a few lawyers, and a few teachers. And most of the teachers didn't live in were not from Alexandria. It took a long time for Alexandrians to get to be teachers here for some unknown reason. I used to substitute.
Okay.
But that was, yeah, that was 50s, 60s. I substituted. But most of the teachers came from out of town. There were very few lawyers here and very few doctors, and the doctors couldn't practice in the hospital. My children were born in Washington because my doctor could not practice at the Alexandria Hospital. But I don't know that the Secret Seven had anything to do with changing that. They worked more on politics, I believe.
Yeah.
And some of them were involved with the Human Relations Council, which came along during the desegregating years. That was a mixed group of African Americans and white people who were trying to ease desegregation here in Alexandria. In my neighborhood, there was, we worked with the theologians from the seminary across the street from us to set up a tutoring program for children in that area. And there were other programs, tutoring programs further downtown to help ease desegregation. They felt that our kids didn't know enough to go to school with white kids, so we had to have special help. Not true, but that was what they thought.
Right.
So we had tutoring programs. The Secret Seven was also involved in our neighborhood. I live now in the seminary section of Alexandria. Back when Alexandria was forced to desegregate, there were 3 high schools, Parker Gray, GW, and Hammond, and they couldn't close Hammond. They couldn't close GW. Those were sacred cows. But they closed Parker Gray, the high school. They made it a middle school. They had to find a place, do something for a school. So they picked this area of seminary where I live now to create a school for the entire city, one public high school, T.C. Williams, and they took the land by eminent domain. Now, Marion Johnson, who was in the Secret Seven, lived in the neighborhood, and they created a civic association, and he was the president. And they held the building of that school up for a few years while they negotiated with that neighborhood. And they ended up giving part of the neighborhood back to the community. And they built 27 houses there. T.C. Williams was the superintendent of schools. He retired, but to add insult to injury, they named a school after him, and he was one of the biggest segregationists in town. He did not want desegregation, and he fought it as far as he could, but the city had to, so they picked this black community to destroy and build a school. And the Secret Seven worked with the community to help them get some homes put back in there. There were like 40 or 50 homes that they destroyed. And they built, I believe, about 27, 29 homes. By the time they built those homes, many of the people that had lived in the neighborhood had found other places to live, which is how I happened to move into that community. But that community dates back to the 1800s. And it's changing now. The interesting thing, white people never lived in that community, but as the older people pass away, younger people stay there, and their kids grow up and out, and then they sell the property, and everybody's buying them except African Americans. So it's a changing community, like the entire city.
Right.
You know, Alexandria doesn't even have a physical black community anymore. Mm-hmm. Everybody lives everywhere. That does not mean there's not a black community here, because we've got more African Americans here now than we've ever had. When I was growing up, there were like 10, 12% African Americans, and gradually it has gotten up to now where it's in the mid-20s. Mm-hmm.
So some of the, as I've grown up here in the city, I've come to know a couple of, certain members of the Secret Seven, not knowing they were members of the Secret Seven until much later. What do you remember about some of the folks that have passed away, like a Melvin Miller or Ferdinand Day, and kind of how they operated as individuals of the Secret Seven, or what they did individually?
Melvin was an attorney, and he helped people with the sit-ins, because there were some sit-ins here, and he was their attorney. Yeah. He was a source of information for everybody. You could go to him and he would give you advice. Sometimes he wouldn't even charge you for it. Most of the time he wouldn't. At least that's what I noticed.
Right.
The Days, Ferdinand Day was really active in the community. He was a native of Alexandria. He and his brother were natives. And, there's a school named for Ferdinand because of all of the things that he did in the community. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As I understand it, he was the first African-American chairman of a school board in the state of Virginia as well.
He was the first African-American from Alexandria, Alexandria appointed to the school board.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And first school board chairman here.
That's right.
Yeah. A great source of information.
Yeah.
Ferdinand Day was. And his daughter Gwen is too. And as well as Melvin's daughter, Erica.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So as a wife of somebody that seems to be that active in the community, how does that affect the home life? Let me say this. From what I've heard and read about some of the individuals working particularly in the deeper South, in the civil rights movement, there was always concern for the safety of their family as they did that work. Was there ever any concern like that?
No, we did not run into anything.
Okay.
It was calm.
Good.
It was calm. The only time that anybody felt threatened, and I don't know if that's the right word or not, during those early desegregating years, there was lots of tension, and there was disruption in the schools. My husband, by this time, he'd been a teacher and assistant principal at Parker Gray High School, and then he was principal of Parker Gray Middle School when it opened as a middle school. And after a couple of years, he became director of student relations and staff activities in central administration. And that was when there was lots of trouble going on in the school. So he was like a troubleshooter.
Okay.
And you listen to my daughter, she would wonder, why does my husband have to be involved in all of this sort of stuff? And I think she felt afraid during that time. But as far as threats to our lives and whatnot, they did not come over the telephone to us. And if my husband got in it, he didn't let us know about it. And I don't think he did.
Okay, good. You noted, and it's well noted, that Alexandria has seen tremendous change over the recent decades. And from what we've seen, and you noted this as well, certain individuals such as a Ferdinand Day have gotten the accolades by the community. What does it mean today, in your opinion, for people to recognize the Secret Seven and what they meant to the city back then and even now?
Well, back then they were just that. They were a Secret Seven. And I did not think of them as an exalted group at the time. I just thought of them as 7 friends working in the community. It was in later years that people began to talk about the Secret Seven. And by then, many of them had passed.
So for our listeners, I think the key themes, the key points out of our conversation are a couple things that I take away, and I'd love to kind of hear your takeaways as well.
That anybody can get out and help. And one person can make a difference. So you get your one self out and you bring along somebody else. Everybody can make a difference. And you get out and do things and somebody else will think you're doing a whole bunch. You're just doing what you think is right. And somebody else will think, boy, she's really working hard. You don't feel like you're working hard. You feel like you're just doing what you should be doing.
That's right.
I listen, I look at what people write about me, and I was on lots of boards and I was just doing it. And they said, wow, I didn't know you were doing so much. And I'm thinking, I'm not doing that much, but you write it down and I guess that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Which means that sometimes people give you credit for knowing more than you really know.
There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But no, this has been a joy to talk about this with you and hear from your perspective about the Secret Seven, not only your history, but the Secret Seven. And also, I think I appreciate how you've kind of put that takeaway out there that it doesn't take a whole army to create change. It takes that one dedicated person, and it doesn't hurt if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 of them all kind of working in concert with each other to make that change. I think we've seen that in history in general. We've seen that on a larger scale. But I think a lot of us and a lot of folks in our different communities forget that they have local folks that are out there working on a regular basis and have been to get our communities to where they are. And so I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. It has been a pleasure and an honor to hear this story. So thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And speaking of historic Alexandria, we are here in the heart of Old Town Alexandria at King's Ransom, Old Town's best spot to talk history and enjoy handcrafted cocktails. And fortunately for us on this episode, owner and master barkeep John Schott crafted a delicious smoked old-fashioned. So to find this recipe and some of John's expert tips and tricks, or to find out how you can join one of John Chapman's Manumission Black History guided walking tours, head over to designateddrinker.show. That's designateddrinker.show. The Designated Drinker Show is produced by Missing Link, a podcast media company that is dedicated to connecting people to intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Also in the Missing Link lineup of podcasts is Roger That, a podcast dedicated to guiding you through the haze of dementia, led by skilled caregivers Bobby and Mike Carducci. Now, if you're looking for a whole new way to enjoy the theater, check out Between Acts, an immersive audio theater podcast experience. Each episode takes you on a spellbinding journey through the works of newfound playwrights, from dramas to comedies and everything in between. Find Missing Link's League of Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, and review the shows. Your review helps our shows reach new audiences. To find out more about Missing Link, visit missinglink.company. That's missinglink.company.